Father Lee will discuss Jules Massenet and Manon, illustrating his remarks with musical examples played on the Baldwin. Father Owen Lee.
Thank you, Peter Allen. Jules Massenet came to me in a dream last night, looking down from the stars. I seemed for a moment to hear the elegant whispery music he wrote for Des Grieux's dream in Manon. So you're going to tell them all about Manon, the composer said. You're going to tell them all about one of my beautiful women who went wrong. Well, be sure you tell them about the notebook. The notebook, I exclaimed as I clutched my pillow. Of course, that's what I tell them. It was a beautiful woman, Massenet's mother, who presented him with his first little boy's notebook and this commandment: if during the day you have said or done something wrong, you must confess it in writing in these pages. Perhaps that will make you hesitate before doing anything wrong again. Little Jules, youngest of his father's 21 children, began by bravely recording a theft of chocolate squares. And he found it was delicious. More delicious than chocolate, this confessing the wrong things he had done. For Mother would invariably be pleased with his courage and give him a warm, forgiving embrace. Massenet tells us all this in the modestly immodest volume that the notebook grew into, Mes Souvenirs. And he adds, it wasn't long before I was munching on other and better chocolate. There is hardly a hint in Massenet's memoirs of the poverty of his youth and the compulsive ambition that drove him to write nearly 30 operas and much other music. To hear him speak of it, composing seemed not much more than the effortless recording in a notebook of the confessions of beautiful women who went wrong. Writing Manon, he says he merely dropped a hint to the most famous librettist of the day, and within 24 hours was sent in return an invitation to lunch at Vachette's. And on the luncheon table he found beneath his napkin the first 2 acts of the libretto. The rest followed in a few days. Then he spent a quiet summer in The Hague, in the very room where the author of the original novel, the Abbé Prévost, had once lived. He would doze off in the Abbé's bed. It was a great cradle, he records, shaped like a gondola. Then he'd rise to stroll for inspiration's sake through the dunes of the North Sea or the woods of the royal palace. And there, he continues characteristically, I made exquisite friends of the little deer who brought me the fresh breath of their muzzles. After that, still in a kind of Disney-esque dreamland, there was the young girl selling violets for a couple of sous on the Boulevard Capucine. Her looks obsessed me, writes Massenet. Her memory haunted me. He never spoke to the girl, but kept her face in his mind's eye all the time he wrote. She was his Manon, so much so that when his work was done, he saw to it that she was given a pass for the whole run of performances that first season. All of this, whether true or less than true, is instructive, especially as we come to Manon on these broadcasts after the full-throated passions of Puccini's later opera on the same subject. Not for Massenet, the unabashed, extroverted ways of Italy. A Frenchman, he understates. His Manon is nothing if not subtle. In every detail he gives us about writing it, the napkin on the table, the bell shaped like a cradle, the soft-muzzled deer, the anonymous flower girl. In all of these details there is a combination of opposites, spontaneity that is studied, laziness that is insistent, a preoccupation with sexuality that is almost innocent. And that's what the opera he wrote is like, carefully observed, tender, sensuous, and above all, subtle. Take the farewell Manon sang in the first act to her little table. It must be the shortest and simplest aria in all of opera, just 24 measures long, only a fraction of the length of a popular song. Under the vocal line, the orchestra provides only a succession of chords. And yet, what wonderfully poignant chords they are. Ravel did not hesitate to use them, and why not? They are as eloquent as the chords in a Chopin prelude, and just by themselves, they shape a little drama. Manon is full of such subtleties. It is famous, for example, for the phrase massonétique, the Massenet phrase, a kind of foreshortening in the melody, a calculated imbalance that makes the musical line irregular, hesitant, tentative, close to conversation. Gounod had already scaled down French operatic singing from its grand opera level, virtually inventing the lyric soprano in his Marguerite, and writing an intimate little conversation for her and Faust when they first meet on the street. Massenet reduces the scale still further. Take this theme from the scene at Saint-Sulpice. A lesser composer would have worked it up along 4 square lines, something like this. Massenet keeps it conversational. The melody expands and contracts as Manon's feelings do in conversation. It is shaped to tell us how she feels. Prévost's original novel was naturalistic, and everyone exclaimed over its psychological realism. Massenet's copy, done in these phrases massonétiques, is similarly naturalistic and sometimes psychologically probing. And that brings us to Massenet's discreet use of, mon Dieu, leitmotifs, recurrent phrases, as in Wagner. His compatriots were not at all happy about this Germanizing, and his enemies, who had referred to him before as the daughter of Gounod, started to call him, after Manon, Mademoiselle Wagner. Of course, Massenet's motifs are not nearly so extensively developed as Wagner's, and they are never sounded in combination. They nonetheless pervade the opera. The whole work, Massenet wrote, moves and develops upon some 15 motifs. Actually, you can extend the number almost to 30 if you care to. And the motifs are shaped by an extraordinary visual sense. Massenet had a truly Wagnerian aptness for synesthesia. The Cour la Reine theme, which opens the opera, is instantly evocative of the place, the period, and somehow of the novelettish quality of the drama to follow. The gambling motif at the Hôtel de Transylvanie just as quickly calls up the frenzied and corrupt milieu of the place, and even something of the impending threat of exposure there. De Grieur's broad cello motif admirably suggests the young nobleman with fine manners. And Manon herself may be said to have a different motif in each of the 6 scenes. She is an ingénue at Amiens, a playful homebody on the Rue Vivienne, a courtesan on the Cour la Reine, a seductress at Saint-Sulpice, an astonishing sphinx, a veritable siren, that is what de Grieux calls her, at the Transylvanie. And finally, a pathetic prisoner on the road to Le Havre. Was ever a Wagner heroine so lavishly motifed? The 5th of Manon's themes actually sounds like Sieglinde's Du bist der Lenz in the Wagner opera we will hear next week, Die Valkyrie. And Massenet sometimes uses his motifs as Wagner had done, to tell the truth in the orchestra when the characters on stage suppress their true feelings. When, in the scene we have just heard, Manon tries to stop de Grieux from opening the door of their little room knowing that his abductors await, she says, "Don't open that door. I want to stay with you." And she really means what she says. But Massenet's orchestra knows more. It knows what else she wants. It plays over and over the motif of de Bretigny, Manon's new admirer, who has promised her wealth. And it is that suppressed desire that has the final word in Act 1. The Abbé Prévost wrote his novel Manon Lescaut as a cautionary tale. The wages of sin is death. And so we'll conclude these remarks with some details from 3 cautionary death scenes. First, from the novel. It's a little gruesome. De Grieux tells how he lay alongside Manon's corpse on the Louisiana sands for a full day, and only buried her when he feared the attack of wild beasts, digging the grave with his bare hands, wrapping the body in his own clothes, covering it with earth after a long vigil, and then awaiting his own death, prostrate on the grave. To the end, he loves his Manon desperately. Then the novelist's death. The Abbé Prévost, after a life even more picaresque and vacillating than his hero's, collapsed from an attack of apoplexy at a roadside cross, appropriately enough, as he was a failed priest. Carried to the doctors and presumed dead, he was subjected to what was thought a post-mortem examination, and actually died not from the apoplexy, but under the knife. So perhaps his death was even more than the cautionary tale he wrote, A Sermon on the Wages of Sin. And that brings us back to Massenet's mother, her moral strictures, and the notebook she gave him. When the little boy was grown old and the most successful opera composer of his day, he wittily appended some posthumous thoughts to his memoirs. He imagined he was dead, and he wrote, "I have taken up life here amid the stars. Oh, the splendor, the sparkle! I was never able to get such lighting effects for my scenes at the opera." Meanwhile, he can hear what the mourners are saying at his funeral. "I loved him so much," says a beautiful soprano. "I always had such success in his operas." "Well, now that he's dead," says a rival, "they won't play his stuff so often, will they?" And Massenet concludes, "I knew that once the stone was sealed, I'd be forgotten in a few hours." Not so. 100 years have passed since Massenet wrote Manon, and his chef-d'oeuvre has had more than 2,000 performances at the Opéra Comique alone. The Paris that destroyed Manon the Lady has kept Manon the Opera alive. And as for New York, well, Massenet, if he's looking down on us from the stars, he'll know that here, too, after too long an absence, his Manon is back on the stage where it rightly belongs, with the greatest masterpieces of the lyric theater. There may be other works on the Metropolitan stage that are more profound, but there are only a few, and most of those are by Frenchmen, that are so subtle.
The first scene in Act 2 of Manon takes place on the promenade of the Cours la Reine on a festival day. In the crowd of merrymakers are Poussette, Javotte, and Rosette, each in turn pursued by the aged Guillot, who becomes increasingly angry as each of them escapes him. Manon enters, accompanied by de Bretigny. She's magnificently gowned and bejeweled, and to the acclaim of the crowd, she sings a gavotte praising the fleeting joys of youth and beauty. Tightrope walking and juggling add to the feverish gaiety of the crowd, who echo Manon's song. Manon starts to leave just as the Comte de Grieux, the Chevalier's father, arrives and is greeted by de Bretigny. Manon overhears the Count tell de Bretigny that his son has given up worldly life for the church and has entered the seminary of Saint-Sulpice. Manon sends de Bretigny to buy her a bracelet and approaches the Count, unaware that he knows her identity. She inquires about the Chevalier for a friend, and the Count tells her that his son is well and has completely forgotten Manon. He bows and takes his leave. Manon is unable to believe that de Grieux has forgotten her, and she decides to go immediately to the church of Saint-Sulpice. De Bretigny returns with the bracelet, only to find that Manon has gone. And as the curtain falls, the crowd resumes its festive song. Catherine Malfitano is Manon, Michel Sénéchal, Guillot, David Holloway, Lescaut, James Courtney, de Bretigny, Ferruccio Forlanetto, the Comte de Grieux, Carolyn Blackwell, Poussette, Cynthia Barnett, Javotte, and Diane Kessling, Rosette. The conductor is Manuel Rosenthal. Cours la Reine is a name that could be translated Promenade of the Queen or the Queen's Walk. A cour is, among other things, a public walk or promenade, usually planted with trees. The Cours la Reine still exists in Paris today, near the center of the town, and was originally laid out right there by a French queen about a century before Manon was written. In this production, the Cours la Reine promenade is crowded with people enjoying the holiday and with peddlers and entertainers of all kinds. There's an enormous amount of activity. But when an aria begins, or an ensemble or important dialogue, the action freezes until the number is over. In fact, the very beginning of the scene, as the curtain rises, is frozen, with dozens and dozens of people on stage in a very festive but absolutely motionless tableau. Then, after only half a minute more of music, they unfreeze, beginning with a little explosion in the chemistry tubes of a quack doctor. A juggler begins to juggle, a Punch and Judy show comes to life, peddlers hawk their wares, and so on. And then, in only another half minute, everyone freezes again, as Poussette, Javotte, and Rosette begin to sing about how they're avoiding Guillot. And near the end of the scene, all the action on stage is frozen until Manon tells Lescaut she is going to Saint-Sulpice. As she says, "À Saint-Sulpice." Fireworks go off. A glowing hot air balloon far off in the sky starts to descend, and all the people unfreeze and resume their holiday gaiety. Earlier, Manon predictably makes a spectacular entrance, spectacular because of a dazzling gown of the brightest possible shining red satin, with velvet flowers of the same bright red, and rubies and diamonds, and a powdered wig with a white egret plume. Lescaut, in this scene, is no longer dressed as a soldier, but like a gallant in an ivory brocade frock coat and knee breeches with plenty of lace, a tall, broad-rimmed hat in the same shade of ivory. Occasionally, as I mentioned earlier, most of the crowd freezes, but a few people may move during the freeze. They may move with the rhythm of the music, or to punctuate the rhythm of the music. That is, for instance, a small group of men may bow in unison to Manon as the whole crowd, for an instant, reacts to something that has been said. Among all the holiday attractions, as well as the Punch and Judy show, there's a Chinese shadow box show that has silhouettes of hands as animals, and those shadows also freeze from time to time with all the other action. There's a long wire running across the stage on which a tightrope walker will display his skill. There's a man stabbing himself with a sword. A bloody dentist's chair with a dentist's diploma mounted prominently near it, and the dentist himself will pull a tooth for a man who comes to him with his face in a bandage. There are clowns in whiteface, a woman animal trainer with a whip, and with a monkey in a red and gold uniform like hers. The monkey, or small ape, does some cartwheels for her, but later escapes from her on top of a sedan chair. There's a striped canvas booth selling wigs, a display of red enamel clocks for sale, hawkers of ribbons and eyeglasses and flowers, dolls, masks, toy trumpets, a cart with steaming soup tureens, a small cafe selling ice cream, a juggler in a harlequin costume, a man on stilts, a maypole, a lottery wheel, a little pavilion with a small band, a man wearing a donkey head pulls a small cart for youngsters to ride in. Most of the action takes place on stage level, but there are two terraces with a long stone staircase center stage, at the head of which Manon will make her entrance in that spectacular red dress. Father Lee was speaking before of the fact that Massenet was criticized for being too Wagnerian in Manon, especially in his use of leitmotifs, and it's true that there was a strong reaction against Wagner in France, partly because there had been such a strong reaction for Wagner. That is, Wagner had exerted a great influence on French composers, and even many who admired him sometimes felt overwhelmed by him. Critics are fond of citing the great moment in Debussy's Pelléas et Mélisande, in which the climax is not expressed through the use of Wagnerian fortissimos, but through not even pianissimo, but silence, overwhelming silence. And Eric Satie once said, "We, that is the French composers, we must have our own music, if possible, without sauerkraut." Now, Manuel Rosenthal, our French conductor this afternoon, is entering, again asking the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra to rise, bowing now to the house, and we'll hear Act 2 of Massenet's Manon.